not humane. Hazing, I'm sorry, and hate is not humane. An eye for an eye is from the dark ages, and it's archaic, in my opinion. Today's justice is not yesterday's justice. I couldn't dig up critical people to testify in one day or from my position, but there are thousands of people out there who love me, who can vouch for my character. Empathy is today's need. Forgiveness is today's need. Love is today's need. Equality and fairness is today's need. These are lessons we could all benefit from. Revenge is not justice. I'm asking you, after already hearing your thoughts, who is a 5-year sentence befitting for? It's a floor prescribed by law. Anyone would understand that the reason I should have a low sentence is in the interest of justice with respect to my history and background, the elements of the case, and inexplicable or unexplained decision of the jury who seem to have miscarried justice and the conditions and climate in prison. I believe the sentence should reflect the hard work and performance of my team, all things considered, and a new pioneering administration of justice, a modern and fair form of justice. There's so much I could have said, but I'm at a loss for words. I know that God will punish Josue's killer, but does everyone else believe this? I think psychology has a lot to do with all of this. There's an obsession with true crime and crime dramas, but in them, they always get their guy. Never a mistake, killer perks, never get away, and the wrong guy is never the person paying for the crime. This is not a reality to people. Fiction or non-fiction, these shows watched by so many don't go there. I've never been into those type of shows I've never been into those type of shows. They're my least favorite TV interests. I just don't understand it. And I'm closing here. There's so much that can be said about the American psyche, about the trial, about trial and criminal justice, but wish I could take questions, but in a world, I work very hard in my life. I'm a very open person. I like how God created me, and I will always have self-respect and defend my character. In my life, I always had a plan. I have goals, dreams. Never imagined this would happen to me. My life basically has already been ruined, shattered. I can't say much about Josue and his family, how some people might be rationalizing that that is what I should be talking about. But at this point, they have a guilty verdict. I'm not sure whether they believe I'm the right guy, but none of my dozens of Hispanic and Latino comrades who I've served closely with and befriended in my life would ever believe that. I wish everyone could have had the chance to know who I really am. For all of you who believe in my innocence, thank you. To everyone who has supported me with prayers, thank you. There's thousands of people who might look back and remember me or reminisce on a time in their life, and I may come to mind, and to see what has happened to me might not be fair to them. I can go on and on with double standards, intercultural and intracultural, but this is another stat for black men in America. When will my community dominate suppression and oppression, proactivity? This case, in my opinion, needs to be reviewed. I urge any court watchers and any of the advocates that I reached out to, congressmen and organizations, to do something. I got nothing when I reached out to them over the time that I was arrested. I felt like people sort of sat back and watched this happen. defendants have been taken in their dignity, I ask them to arise and say that it's not over for me yet. With all respects, Your Honor, I appreciate anything that you would give me. I, of course, prepared that. I in no way wanted to be inflammatory with anything that I stated. And I still, at this time, send my condolences to the family. Some people may be critical of me being not remorseful. I know that's a common thing that people say, but everyone has their emotions come about in a different way. And I don't know what to say, which is why I prepared something. So,
Is that awesome?
yes, ma'am.
All right, the jury having found you guilty, I hereby assess your version of life and institutional vision of Texas Department of Criminal Justice. You will get credit for any time you spend in custody. You will remain in the sheriff so you can carry out your duties.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome.
Go on.
I need to announce following notice of appeal verbally on the record. Your Honor, at this time, the defendant gives notice of appeal to the first. The defendant verbally gives notice of appeal to the first or 14th Court of Appeals. I will be filing a written motion, notice of appeal at a later time.
Oh, these microphones are still on.
Sir?
These microphones are still on.
Mr. Shearer. Mr. Shearer.
Oh.
Denise Collins, en este caso, para pedirle clemencia nuevamente, de nueva cuenta, en esta sentencia de vida en prisión que ha recibido este hombre de 33 años acusado de matar a Josue Flores en el 17 de mayo de 2016. Pero a ver, ¿me quedo aquí?
Oh, you're gonna roll? Damn it, you got
They rolling on this back at the station?
Yeah, they're gonna roll. Check, check, check. Oh, grab that phone.
por las manifestaciones y por ningún otro testimonio dijo fuera de este caso, fuera de la evidencia, y que esa era su decisión determinante. Allá dentro de la sala no solo está la familia Flores, que en unos momentos hablarán en conferencia de prensa, sino también está la fiscal del condado Harris, Kim Ogg, quien ha llegado precisamente en el momento preciso de que se estaba dando esa sentencia de cadena perpetua para Andrew Jackson de 33 años. Es lo que tenemos hasta el momento desde la Corte Criminal del condado Harris. Regresamos contigo al estudio, Cristal.
Que realmente no hay nada que pudiera mitigar esta sentencia porque el crimen ha sido demasiado horrible, lo que pasó trágicamente con Josue Flores. Hasta que mi reporte regreso con ustedes.
Cheese. This is one night. No sé qué día.
Stay where you're at. Yeah, stay right there. Take stuff over there.
Okay.
No pictures, please. Come on, man, no pictures. The part of the
Ni siquiera me dijo clear, ¿qué?
Anyone have a good
Mr. John, any comment, Mr. John?
Oh, say something, your boss is inside.
That is a comment.
Does anyone have a spelling for stepdad, the first name?
Dara?
Is it
Dorrell.
Dorrell.
He pronounces it as Dorrell.
Okay, okay.
¿Quieres que lo ponga ahí?
A veces te funciona, a veces te ponen solo. No, معلش خليني ينزل الانجليزي. No?
No.
And here, I just pasted over the line and copy. I don't know. Anyway, I'm gonna try to.
Y ponerlo en el
Micrófono. Ok.
Fíjate si llega eso.
Ahí va. ¿Este está prendido? I don't know whose this is. Is this yours? Is it on? Ahí está. Dámelo, el micrófono. bien? No llores, no llores tampoco.
Pay, amount of package, just paste that copy into the queue file, you should be able to, should be good to go. What I texted back to you, when I messaged back to you, use that copy. Did you get that copy?
Estamos en espera de la fiscalía, estamos en espera de los fiscales que estuvieron involucrados en el caso de Josue Flores y las reacciones, por supuesto, ante esta sentencia que, bueno, se prolongó durante toda esta.
Okay, so it hasn't been gone online yet, correct? Okay, great. No, it hasn't gone online yet, so just, yeah. I don't think so, but, okay, thank you. Are you guys gonna come over and chat with us, Mr. Shearer?
Who are y'all planning on interviewing?
We'd like to interview.
The defense, everybody involved in the case.
I'll stick around.
Can you?
You want to be
You wanna
back?
I don't want to go first.
Oh, okay, okay.
See what they say.
Okay, cool.
También escuchamos ahí por parte de los abogados defensores que van a estar haciendo un comentario hasta una vez que hable la fiscalía.
All the stations are asking for last name. I'm not really sure. Do they want me to shoot this? I don't think so. No one's got it.
¿Qué pasó? Dime. Ahorita estamos esperando, todos estamos esperando eso.
Right, but I mean, are we putting that up on like a pool channel?
Sí, si tú quieres, si tú quieres, sí, claro que sí. Nada más que ¿me vas a querer en vivo para las 10 o cómo? ¿O vas a querer? Sí, es lo que me dijo Susi. O sea, que haga un intro y audio aquí.
Ah.
Ok, dale. Dale, ven. A mí me dijo, a mí que Marcelo le gusta quedarse a las 10, me dijo, no, dile que joder, mañana vos te vas a levantar. Exacto, yo sé, le dije, no, yo voy a hacer nada. ¿Quieres agarrarlo ahorita? ¿O por qué es que van a venir?
No, pero tiene que ser ese, no se tiene que ver la cortina, una cosa.
Por eso, esperemos. Solo va a ser bien. No te preocupes, me da la pantalla para yo arreglo. Yo no los arreglo cuando llegue a la casa. Yo no voy a provocar, se lo voy a arreglar, se lo voy a arreglar.
Aparte me insulta, mi hermano no me insulta. Es en serio de nuevo. Es después de sueño como ayer. No, todo bien. Sí. Doble polo. Puedo usar perfume polo. Polo. Y decirle
See how urgent it is. I can just take your card and feed it to my camera.
¿Tenés la tarjeta donde está el audio de la cinta? Para nada más usar el mismo audio. Ah, pero es que mandaste el paquete y se puede usar el mismo, ¿no? Y nada más pongo el audio y lo corto y le pongo el beso. Es que no está levantando eso.
Oh, ya le dije que ok. Pero no hay nadie ahí, ¿verdad? Tócale, déjale saber que va a traer.
Yeah, oh yeah, they just added us at 6.
Okay, they just added us. So just added us.
But she was like, had her hand out, she was looking at me really fast. I said, I got her now. Hold on.
Stand by. Muy bien. Stand by.
Okay, what's about to come out, Pamela's going to make a statement. They don't want to take any questions, but Kim and the attorneys will. Okay?
Hola. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My check. My check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My check. My check. My check.
Everybody's like, Tom.
El único video que estamos haciendo, las dos veces.
Pásale, doña María.
Gracias.
Si quiere decir algo, dígalo ahora.
Mi esposo le doy la palabra.
Pásale. No.
Muchas buenas tardes a todos. Disculpen la emoción. Estamos emocionados y contentos a la vez, satisfechos con el sistema. Yo siempre dije, se presentaron muchos problemas, no del sistema, el tiempo, cuántas cosas, pero yo siempre confié en el sistema, siempre confié en la justicia, siempre confié en el gobierno, en la fiscalía. Hasta el día de hoy le agradezco que al final se ha hecho justicia para mi hijo Josue Flores. A todos ustedes les agradezco todo este proceso, todo lo que ha acontecido, que quede en la mente y los corazones de nosotros, que Josue, su memoria, su forma de ser, el estudiante que fue, su sonrisa, todo ese legado que mi hijo dejó. Recuérdenlo siempre con amor. Gracias a todos.
Gracias a toda la comunidad que nos acompañó, que nos dieron sus oraciones. Muchas gracias a todos y a todos los presentes, que son un amor.
¿Piensa, doña María, que hubo justicia?
Claro que sí. Claro que sí. Hubo justicia para Josue Flores.
¿En inglés, por favor?
They don't speak English. They don't. So, did you want to?
Yes, but Mr. Perez will be giving a statement as
Okay.
well.
Okay. Go ahead.
John, come up here. Chris, come up here. I'm Kim Ogg, Harris County District Attorney. Justice was done today for Josue Flores, 6 years after his tragic and brutal murder. The near North Side, the Flores family, Josue's friends, and all the supporters in Houston who love our children today get some measure of peace, we hope, with the life sentence handed down to Andre Jackson. What we can't do is bring him back, and we grieve with the family. I want to thank, from the bottom of my heart, these prosecutors who work day and night on this case. They are not the first or the only lawyers in the 6 years that this case has been pending to have worked on the case. There were many, but they are the lawyers who brought this verdict home. I want to thank our victims assistance coordinators who helped the family and who were there every step of the way with them. I want to thank Ruben Perez, a longtime community advocate and prosecutor, very dedicated to not just our Latino communities, but all of our communities. But he speaks for us in many of these cases and will speak today. I want to thank the jury for their careful, thorough, and attentiveness during the trial and for their decision, a difficult and hard decision and a just decision. And finally, I want to thank the judge for this life sentence. It was appropriate. It was really the only verdict any of us could imagine, or the only sentence any of us could imagine for this horrific murder. And I want to thank the members of the media who have covered this case many of the days of the 6 long years that this family, friends, and community have waited for justice. That, I'd like to give our prosecutors a chance to answer some of your questions and make a statement themselves. John Jordan, lead prosecutor, Chris Condon, second chair. John?
John, how difficult was this, given the fact that it was 6 years that passed almost? Many twists and turns and failures, if you want to call them that way, in the investigation.
So many police officers over the years worked tirelessly for this day. So many prosecutors before Chris and I who worked on the case worked tirelessly for this day. Because this case took 6 years, I think we saw the evolution of our criminal justice system. And the great result is finally, we got justice. Not many times in this courthouse do we know the case by the name of the victim, and that's a shame. But this case is known by the case of Josue Flores because he was 11 years old. This month, he should be walking across the stage of graduation, and instead his killer got a life sentence.
What was the challenge in this case in a specific when we talk about DNA and to prove that DNA of Josue was in that jacket?
I think the challenge was a number of years ago dismissing the case, knowing the DNA was inconclusive, with the hope that one day we would be here today. And it looks like that is what was realized.
How hard was it? I mean, obviously you got the guilty verdict, but pretty unusual that you presented a case without a motive.
Luckily, the law does not require a motive. I think we, all 4 million of us in Harris County, would love to know why Andre Jackson did this brutal, horrible crime. But could there ever really be a reason to kill an 11-year-old child as he's walking home from school? So I think we're asking a question that there's no answer to.
Mr. Jordan, we heard a lot today about Mr. Jackson and learned a lot about him that I feel like we didn't know throughout the first 7 days of this trial. Why was none of that included in the testimony?
Well, if you notice, we didn't talk a whole lot about Josue Flores either. When we're talking about the guilt-innocence phase of the trial, it's all about the crime and who done it. But y'all saw the punishment stage of the trial. The judge did the appropriate thing.
Do you think he'll ever take responsibility for his actions, for that of Josue's death or his mental health?
I've learned not to speak for defendants, but from what we saw in the courtroom, what we saw during these proceedings, I'm not waiting for him to take responsibility.
What's the message to those out there that might think they can get away with something like this in the future?
The message to our community, unfortunately, we are all too familiar with the fact that tragedy happens. But I think this is a story of a family that is supported and loved. This is a story of a community that cares. And I guess sometimes justice takes a while, but eventually we get there.
Just walk us through how you're feeling right now. And after 6 years, so many ups and downs, twists and turns in this case. Just has it hit you yet? The fact that you delivered this and you guys have justice now?
I can say it was an honor to go into court and attempt for Chris and I to attempt to give Josue a voice. I said yesterday, and I truly believe it, that this DNA, this little DNA on the jacket, was Josue speaking to us all and telling us it's him, and please give me justice.
And John, I was just speaking with someone earlier about how everybody knows Josue Flores' name, and you're right, that's very unusual. It's typically the defendant's name that you call the trial by, but everyone knows this is the Josue Flores case. Speak to just the importance of that and the magnitude of that.
Well, all too often in this courthouse, victims don't get their day, and we have a career where we're trying to move them from victims to survivors. Josue will always be a victim. Today, hopefully, his family can get to the point of being a survivor. Josue Flores is somebody that will always remain with us in our community because of the future that was lost. I think every parent, it's their worst nightmare. And we can't imagine going through this.
Just to be more specific on my previous question, was there a conscious decision or decision with the defense to not include any of his mental health diagnoses in the testimony?
I cannot speak to that. Thank you. Yes.
I'd like Ruben Perez. He often speaks, not for the family, but he's been present and with the family. He's been with our office since my administration began, and he's been part and parcel of our community engagement and response with, these are just a very few of the thousands of people that cared about Josue, whether they knew him or not. Ruben?
Thank you, Kim. Buenas tardes. Me llamo Rubén Pérez, soy el jefe del Special Crimes Bureau. Yo estaba cargado de este cargo con los fiscales. De parte de la Fiscalería de D.A. Kemag, le quiero dar gracias a todos los policías, a toda la comunidad, pero especialmente a la familia Flores, al señor Juan y María Flores, por toda la paciencia, todo el apoyo y todo el cariño que extendieron para nosotros durante este juicio, porque estaba muy difícil. Hemos estado mucho tiempo con la familia y fueron muy pacientes con nosotros en la búsqueda de justicia. Y gracias a Dios se hizo justicia hoy. Se hizo justicia hoy. Y como le digo, con todo corazón, le quiero dar gracias otra vez a la familia, porque tiene que ser una pérdida muy grande, naturalmente, pero todo el tiempo nunca ellos alegaron con nosotros, todo el tiempo los apoyaron, todo el tiempo los tuvieron mucha confianza y diciendo, Rubén, yo estoy con ustedes, estamos con usted, yo sé que esa va a ser la justicia. Y como le digo, gracias a Dios, sí se hizo la justicia. Y la sentencia de vida perpetua para el acusado es algo que se hizo la justicia en este caso. Pero nunca, tenemos nosotros que tenemos años de andar en este trabajo, este caso nunca se nos va a olvidar el nombre de José Flores. On behalf of District Attorney Kemag, I want to thank all the police officers, all the victim advocates, the community, but I really want to thank the family, Mr. and Mrs. Flores, for their patience, for their support, and their love for us. We've been dealing with them for a long time. They've been very patient. It's been a long journey for justice in this case, and justice finally arrived, and of course, life in prison for the defendant who killed this child is the appropriate sentence. But again, on behalf of Kemag, I want to thank the prosecutors, I want to thank the police officers, I want to thank everybody in the community, but I'll emphasize, I want to thank them for extending all the love, support, and patience in waiting for justice to be done in this case. There have been those in the community sometimes who wanted to rush this case. We couldn't rush because we wanted to do it right. We wanted to do it, and we did it right. And we did it right, and justice was served in this case.
I just want to ask you if you can, Pedro, ¿puedes hablar?
No, I'm going to invite him. Ruben, did you have anything
No,
else?
I'm done.
This is Josue's closest friend. Come on up, Angel Nadio, and I think he has a statement for you.
Cada vez que pensaba en Josue Flores antes de esta victoria, lo único que podía venir a la mente era la injusticia de que nunca encontraron a su asesino. Y eso no era algo que yo quería tener en la mente, porque cuando quiero pensar en Josue, quiero pensar en su sonrisa, quiero pensar en los chistes que decían en la clase, que hacía a todos los alumnos reír. Quiero pensar en la unidad en los que nos tenía, de que cada vez que lo mirábamos, cada vez que estaba en esa clase, nos hacía sentir alegres y emocionados para estudiar y para tener una pasión para la escuela, porque como su mejor amigo, yo lo conocía como esperanza, como algo por qué sonreír. Y lo último que me dijo fue que nos hiciéramos una promesa el uno al otro, de que no importa cómo cambiemos en el futuro, no importa cómo seamos en unos cuantos años o cuánto cambiemos, siempre seríamos mejor amigos y siempre nos íbamos a apoyar, nunca nos íbamos a decepcionar. Y al siguiente día ya no estaba conmigo. Y ahora, de una forma u otra, siento que él mantuvo su promesa, siendo mi inspiración y siendo lo que me decía, que siga adelante, porque cada vez que miro esa foto en mi pared, pienso en lo que me dijo y me da la motivación de seguir adelante. Y ahora yo siento que agarrando esta justicia para él, por fin poniendo a su asesino detrás en la cárcel donde pertenece, ya puede estar en paz. Y por fin la memoria de Josue Flores en mi mente va a ser de pura alegría, pura felicidad y de su sonrisa que era tan contagiosa con todos nosotros en la escuela.
¿Puedes decir algo en inglés, por favor?
Yes, of course I can. Before this victory today, every time I thought of Josue, all I could think about was the injustice that his murderer was never caught. That's the only thing that came to mind, and that was not the way I wanted to remember him. I wanted to know him by his smile. I wanted to know him by his enjoyment, by his excitement for learning, and his passion for making everybody happy. I didn't want that memory to stay that way, and I'm glad that it changed today, because the last thing he ever told me before his tragic murder was a promise that we made to each other. He told me that no matter how we changed in the future, no matter how we became as people, no matter what happened, we'd be there for each other. We'd be best friends, and we'd never let the other person down. And in a way, I feel like he kept that promise to me, because every time I woke up in the morning and I looked at that picture of him on my wall, I remember that promise. And he gave me the motivation to keep going. He gave me the strength to get up and say, this day is for Josue. And now I feel like I made it up to him, because with this justice today that we were able to serve for him, finally putting his killer behind bars, he's finally at peace. And I can finally think of him only as his smile and his happiness and everything that he did for me. And I can't wait to go on in the future, become a veterinarian in 10 years, and say that it was all because of him and all for him. And I'm happy that me, his family, and everyone who loved him can finally be at peace. Thank you.
Is there anybody else who wanted to speak? Well, a moment of indulgence, if you will. I want to give you a little insight about how prosecutors feel at the conclusion of cases like this. We don't celebrate. It's not joy that we feel. We are, as prosecutors, the guardians of justice. We don't have a single client. We represent everyone. And so when we get a verdict, especially after a long period of time, a verdict made possible in part by the advancement of science, we thank God. And that's what I asked your indulgence for. I just want to thank God for my prosecutorial team. I want to thank God for the strength that God gave the Flores family and the Northside community. And I have a message for other crime victims out there, and for the community in particular. And that message is never give up hope. There's always hope for justice through the advancement of technology and science, through eyewitness testimony, through people who change their minds later and decide to come forward and do the right thing. And in this case, I just want to thank God for the justice delivered today after 6 long years to the Josue Flores family and to his community. And thank you all. Okay. And I do know okay, you're gonna stick with this? Because where else would you want to be?
Is anybody ever hear from me, the defense?
Yeah. Can you start off and give us your first and last name?
Sure. My name is R. Scott Shear. I'm going to be an appellate attorney handling this case. First of all, I'd like to say that we have condolences for the family. We feel for this horrible, horrible crime. It's hard not to have sympathy for the family. At the same time, convicting the wrong person isn't justice. 2 wrongs do not make a right. We had the opportunity, all of the attorneys, to speak to the jurors after the trial, and uniformly they stated that the difference between a not guilty and a guilty was the DNA evidence, just the DNA evidence. And in this case, it's trace DNA evidence. Literally, the technology has advanced so far that they can get a trace or an identification for just 5 or 10 skin cells. I walk around all day long leaving skin cells on doors, on handles, things of that nature. So it's not probative of a murder. This, in our opinion, is a problem with contamination. I fear for the future, if this is all it takes to convict somebody of murder. It should be concerning for the citizens that this is all it takes. My client was never identified by any witness as the person that was the murderer. He's a calm, passive, well-mannered individual with no history of violence. And now they say, just out of the blue, he's a axe murderer. It makes no sense. And there was no motive. Unfortunately, the technology of DNA has advanced so far that the law and the public's understanding of DNA hasn't caught up. The public and the law doesn't consider the flaws of DNA that's so specific and so good that they can read and get a match from just 5 or 10 skin cells. So in my opinion, that kind of evidence should never be allowed in a court of law without appropriate safeguards, and that's what we'll be arguing on appeal, amongst other issues. My client is extremely upset. Although he respects the jury system and the jury verdict, he maintains his innocence, and we're going to be continuing to fight to prove that. It's going to be an uphill battle, but we hope we can prevail, and I have confidence that eventually he'll be cleared. I mean, what is the DA going to say to Andre Jackson at 20 years or 30 years or 40 years when that unknown third sample comes back that was mixed with Josue Flores' DNA, and it comes out to be a crime scene investigator or a police officer or a lab technician? This is clearly, in our opinion, an example of contamination, mishandling. It doesn't prove murder. And just as an example, if I go out to one of our great Houston restaurants and I pull the table out or I pull the chair out, my DNA, my skin cells are on that chair. I leave my dinner and the next guy comes in, pulls the chair out. My skin cells came from that chair. They're on his hand. If he goes home, God forbid, and gets in a fight with his wife and strangles her and throws her in the woods and says, I didn't do it, guess whose DNA is on her neck? And they do a buccal swab. Of course, it'll come out to be his. That's his wife. You would expect that. But now I'm the murderer because my touch DNA is on her neck. This is a non-appropriate use of this kind of DNA technology. And I'm going to do everything I can to try to get this turned around.
Why do you think that type of defense didn't work with this jury?
It's hard for the average person to understand the technology and the pitfalls of that technology. The technology is great, but perhaps the trial lawyers didn't do a good enough job of explaining, the why and the how and the problems with just touch DNA. There have been cases all over the nation that have found touch DNA to be, not so good.
What are you planning to do next? What are the next steps in this case for you?
For me, I'll have to file. I gave verbal notice of appeal today, and then the next couple days I will have a written notice of appeal filed. We'll obtain the transcript from the court reporter, and then I'll start researching the issues and present the appeal in a written brief.
Given Mr. Jackson's mental history, is it possible he did this and doesn't know it, or do you feel like the evidence proves that he did not do it?
I don't know, as a matter of fact, whether he did it or not. I can tell you this is not enough evidence to convict somebody of murder. Personally, I don't think he did it. I mean, this just doesn't fit. Somebody like this who has no prior history of violence, who has, the psychological stuff is just kind of minor stuff. From my understanding and having talked to some professionals in the field, there's usually some prior examples of violence, or maybe somebody was a child and they killed young animals, or threatened people's lives and did all these things. And usually then that builds up to this, horrible thing. This person has no indication of any prior tendencies to violence or murder or killings or stabbings, nothing. The case doesn't fit.
Do you think his mannerisms, like him smiling and looking around, do you think that affected or had an effect on the jury?
In the 30 years I've been a criminal defense attorney, I've spoken to jurors and they've had some, off-the-wall reasons why they would find somebody guilty or not guilty. It's hard to say what they picked up on, and hindsight is 20/20. Maybe he should have testified to begin, in the beginning at the guilt-innocent stage. But how do you act? What's the appropriate way to behave when you didn't do it, when you're innocent? I mean, it's kind of a dang if you do, dang if you don't. But it's horrible no matter what. It's a horrible crime, and it's a terrible, insufficient evidence type situation to convict somebody of murder.
Are you able to share why none of his mental health information was allowed during the actual trial?
I was not involved in the case until a few months before the trial. I don't know what the strategy was of the trial attorneys. Perhaps it didn't rise to the level of mental defect such that he would be excused from being convicted. That was their decision. I wasn't involved with that.
Mr. Jackson talked about having concerns about his safety in the jail, and also he said it was inhumane to be, locked up 23 out of the 24 hours. Is there anything you can do about that, or are there any plans moving forward to try to get changes?
Yes, within a fairly short period of time after the time for the motion for new trial is over, he will be transferred to TDC and perhaps be less restricted in that regard.
Anybody else? Can we get your name again and title?
Yes, I've got it. R. Scott Shearer.
Please spell that, your last name.
SHEARER.
Art.
Common spelling of the title, S-C-O-T.
Thank you.
If any of y'all have any other questions on me, it'll